Hey guys, tonight we're slipping quietly into silk shoes and stepping back into the shadowy splendor of ancient China's Forbidden City, a place where gold gleams, voices whisper, and freedom is something you only read about in poems. You, tonight, are a queen, which sounds lovely, until you realize it's less powerful ruler and more a very fancy bird in a very beautiful cage. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It helps me keep making these sleepy dives into history. And while you're at it, drop a comment with where you're listening from in your local time. I always love seeing who's staying up late across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You sit still, but nothing is calm. Your silk robe doesn't rustle. Your breath doesn't dare fog the chilled morning air of the throne room. And your footsteps, should you be foolish enough to take one, would be swallowed instantly by the sheer quiet of this place. The palace is alive, but it doesn't breathe like the outside world. It inhales rules and exhales silence. You're not standing here by accident. You were chosen, selected, presented like the finest dish at a feast you don't get to eat. Months ago, maybe years, your family sent you here dressed in your most demure gown, armed with nothing but modesty, submission, and an awkwardly rehearsed smile. The officials watched you bow, the Empress measured you with eyes like cold tea, and somewhere, deep within the palatial maze, the Emperor's advisors wrote your name down. And just like that, your real one began to fade. You're now one of many, a jade ornament among jade ornaments. Outside, the city pulses with life. Vendors bark out prices, children chase paper dragons, and the scent of fried scallion pancakes clings to the morning air. But here, your world is a soundproof dream. The palace grounds are enormous, vast enough to walk for an hour without seeing a gate, but it all loops inwards like a spiral. There is no outside, not really. You live among carved dragons and color-coded ranks. Red pillars rise like disciplined soldiers. Roofs gleam with yellow tiles reserved only for the son of heaven himself. And every garden you pass has been arranged just so. Not to soothe, but to impress. You learn quickly that you're supposed to blend in with the garden, not smell the flowers. There are rules you know, and rules you don't know yet. When to speak, rarely. When to smile carefully, how to bow, as though your bones aren't yours, and how to float across a room without seeming to exist at all. There are mornings when you wake to the echo of bells, deep, distant tones that vibrate through the corridors and signal the start of yet another day you won't control. You slip into your robes, 5 layers, embroidered with plum blossoms and golden phoenixes that scratch at your skin, and let the handmaidens fix your hair into coils so tight they pull at your scalp. No mirrors, of course. You must be beautiful, but not vain. Presentable, but not proud. It's like being dressed for battle, except you're fighting with eyelashes, posture, and a smile that doesn't scare anyone too much. You walk down corridors so long they seem to fold in on themselves. On the walls, red lacquer glints, catching slices of your reflection and distorting you just enough to make you question your own face. You pass other women like you, some older, some younger, some with eyes like flint and lips pressed into secrets. You nod politely. You don't speak unless spoken to. Everyone here is performing a role, and no one forgets their lines. Somewhere in this glittering labyrinth is the Emperor. You might see him today, or not. He is the center of everything and also unreachable, like the sun, distant, worshipped, and capable of scorching you if you get too close. Your title may say queen, but really, your name on a list. A shimmering robe in a room full of shimmering robes. That's not to say you're powerless. Not exactly. You can learn the rhythms of the court, the subtleties of which tea to offer to whom, and when to glance just long enough to be noticed, but never long enough to be remembered for the wrong reason. You can make alliances, not with generals or ministers, no, but with handmaidens, seamstresses, and the quiet eunuchs who glide through the palace like shadows and somehow know everything. Still, your freedom ends at the same place every day. The high stone walls that guard the palace like a jealous husband. You're not allowed out. Not to the market, not to the riverbanks, not to your childhood home. You live and breathe the palace. Its seasons become your seasons. Its rules, your religion. Historians still debate whether some queens had secret ways of sending messages beyond the walls, slipped into bolts of silk or whispered through bribed servants. But whether it worked or not, most of them were forgotten outside. Your name, your laughter, your very existence fades from the city as soon as the gates close behind you. The palace becomes your life, and outside becomes a myth. And yet you stay soft, because softness is expected. You learn to speak in low, slow tones. You sit with your hands folded, just so. You walk like a poem, but there are days when your silence roars. Days when the gold paint flakes from a pillar and reminds you that even palaces age, that even queens are temporary. You start to notice things, how the silk of your robes feels different in winter, how the candles in your chamber flicker toward the same crack in the wall, how the same star always peeks through your window before dawn. These tiny, ordinary things become your world. Your rebellion is knowing their names. Your survival is noticing what no one else does. Because power here isn't in shouting, it's in patience. In knowing that the stillest pond reflects the clearest secrets. You are meant to be here. Not really. You could have been a farmer's wife, a healer, a wandering poet. But instead, you are here in a palace that looks like a dream and feels like a net. And tonight, as the wind brushes past silk screens and the moon settles softly over the yellow rooftops, you lie in a bed too large for one, in a room too quiet to sleep in. And still you listen, because even in this silence, the palace speaks. And you, queen of nothing and everything, are beginning to understand its language. The palace is made of stone, wood, lacquer, and memory, but mostly it's made of walls. Tall ones, thick ones, painted in imperial red, their edges softened by centuries of wind and incense. As you move deeper into the inner court, you begin to notice that these walls don't just hold up buildings, they hold back lives. Your own included. They're not just architectural marvels meant to impress visiting envoys. They're barriers, dividers, elegant prisons dressed in poetry. From the moment your slippers touch the jade tile floor, you're reminded where you can and can't go. There are courtyards you're allowed in and others you aren't. Sometimes the forbidden areas change without notice. One day, you're welcome in the garden of pear blossoms. The next, your presence there is inappropriate. No one explains why. The rules move like mist, always present, impossible to grab. You carry yourself with rigid grace, knowing that every step is watched by invisible eyes behind bamboo screens and half-closed doors. The other women, consorts, concubines, ladies in waiting, move with the same precision, their bodies trained over years of practice to glide through halls like obedient ghosts. There's an unspoken choreography here. One must never walk faster than the rank above them. Your bow must last exactly the length of a court official's breath. Even sitting has a posture, a geometry of the spine, elbows, and folded hands that speaks volumes without ever opening your mouth. These rules are so many and so strict that you begin to suspect their real purpose is not order but control. If they can dictate how you walk, how you blink, how you exist, then what's left of you that you can call your own? And yet it works. Days begin to lose their shape. Your thoughts soften, blurred at the edges. You don't even notice it first, but slowly the idea of wandering anywhere unaccompanied becomes absurd. You laugh, but only behind a fan. You speak, but only in tones approved by propriety. You grow used to someone always trailing just behind you, a maid, a eunuch, a whisper protocol. And if on some nights you dream of running barefoot across the rooftops or sneaking out to the city in a servant's cloak, You never speak of it aloud, because you know the walls wouldn't just keep you in, they'd bring you back. The laws here don't come as commands. They come as traditions. That's what makes them impossible to argue with. You're told it's always been this way. That rules protect you. That restriction is dignity. And there's no one here to tell you otherwise. Even the guards, with their spears and stone-carved expressions, enforce the unspoken boundaries like monks guarding sacred truth. You learn that the layout of the palace itself is built around hierarchy. The emperor lives in the center, as close to the heavens as one can be on earth. The further out from him you live, the lower your importance. You reside in the inner court, not quite the center, not quite the edge, somewhere between visible and forgotten. You begin to understand that the structure itself is a map of your place in the world. You've been given a title, a chamber, and a life of delicate margins. Historians still debate whether some queens try to challenge this quiet confinement. A few tales survive, rumors of letters smuggled beyond the walls, of women disguising themselves to follow servants, of veiled protests sewn into embroidery. But none of those stories have names. They're all someone once said, or legend holds. And that's the point. If a queen ever did rebel, the record would erase her faster than a brushstroke. So instead, you stay still. You admire the way morning light slants across the floor tiles. You notice how the koi in the pond come to the surface when they hear footsteps, hoping for crumbs. You learn to draw meaning from the arrangement of chrysanthemums in a vase. Because when the grand world is locked away from you, the small world becomes vast. Even your body is not your own in this place. There are protocols about how you bathe. When you bathe, who prepares your bathwater? When you sleep, a handmaiden may sleep just outside your curtain, listening for movements, listening for maybe nothing, maybe everything. You once tried to ask what would happen if you left your chamber in the middle of the night, just to walk under the stars. The maid had looked horrified. "My lady," she whispered, "you would bring shame upon your house." Shame, the great ghost that floats through the palace, unseen but constantly feared. It's what keeps everyone so well behaved. Shame is how the walls stay high, even when there's no one watching. One evening, while sipping chrysanthemum tea from a porcelain cup so delicate it trembles in your fingers, you hear a flute playing from a distant courtyard. The sound is thin, lonely, like it's trying to slip past the walls. For a moment, you imagine yourself as that note, a single sound that dares to reach somewhere it isn't allowed. But the moment fades, as all moments must hear. A soft knock at your door tells you it's time to prepare for bed. Yes, even bedtime is scheduled. You rise, bow your head, and follow the rhythm of duty once again. There is comfort in routine, they say, and maybe there is. Maybe that's why so many queens learned to find peace in embroidery, in poetry, in the quiet rituals that shape their day. But even as you sit and stitch plum blossoms onto a silk handkerchief, your hands moving in a practiced rhythm, you know that this calm is enforced, not chosen. You live in a world where silence is praised and obedience is elegance, where wandering eyes can ruin a life, and stepping into the wrong corridor can be seen as a challenge to the throne. You realize that the walls aren't just around you, they're inside you now. They've taken root, shaped your thoughts, your spine, your breath. And as you lie in bed that night, your eyes tracing the pattern of the wooden beams above you, you wonder, if you were to leave, if the gates simply opened one day, where would you even go? Would you still walk in straight lines? Would you still bow to empty corridors? Or have you become, like so many before you, part of the palace itself? A breathless echo within these ancient walls, beautiful, composed, and never freed. You're given a new name the moment you cross the threshold of the inner palace. A name chosen not by your parents, not by you, but by someone with a long title and very little interest in who you used to be. It happens quickly, almost politely, as if someone's just suggesting a light wardrobe change rather than the quiet theft of your identity. From now on, they say, you will be called, and just like that, The syllables your mother whispered into your hair as a child are wiped away like dust from a lacquered scroll. Your old name, the one tied to your village, your childhood, your clumsy handwriting, is gone. Replaced by a title that sounds beautiful in theory, but lands heavily in your chest, like a label on a drawer you're not allowed to open. This new name is often poetic, something like elegant orchid or jade harmony, depending on what qualities the palace wants to project onto you, not what you actually possess. It's more branding than identity, a decorative flourish meant to suggest grace and virtue. You find yourself saying it aloud in your head, trying to make it feel like it belongs to you. It doesn't. It belongs to the palace. Because in this world, names are not simply who you are, they're how others are meant to treat you. And yours places you somewhere in the confusing, color-coded hierarchy of the imperial harem. You're not at the top, of course. That space is reserved for the Empress, whose name is carved into ceremonial plaques and whose footsteps are announced with percussion. But you're not at the bottom either. You're somewhere vaguely middle, a place where you have just enough status to be noticed, but not enough to be protected. Which means your new name comes with responsibilities, and those responsibilities come with risks. You are expected to be gracious, clever, gentle, but not cleverer than the Empress, and certainly not more noticeable than the Emperor's current favorite. You must walk a careful tightrope between existing and existing too much. And still, despite the pressure to embody this new title, no one teaches you what to do with it. You receive no handbook, no guide, only nods, glances, and unspoken expectations that land in your lap like coiled silk. You begin to feel yourself slipping between two worlds, the girl you once were and the figure you're supposed to perform. You remember your old name only in dreams now, those blurry midnight scenes where someone calls out to you and you don't answer in time. Or worse, you do, and wake up feeling like you've committed a betrayal. And as days stretch into months, your new name becomes your only name. The palace uses it like a password. It opens doors, it draws bows, it gets murmured in records that will someday be burned or forgotten. Even when someone speaks to you softly, perhaps a handmaiden helping you into a robe, or a eunuch bringing your evening tea, it's the new name they whisper. Not yours. Never yours. That name, your real one, is tucked somewhere deep inside you now, like a note hidden in a sleeve. Some days you can almost touch it. Other days, you fear you've already let it go. There are moments when you wonder if the name ever mattered. After all, here, it's not your story that counts. It's the Emperor's. You're not the main character in this palace drama. You are at best a delicate subplot. So maybe it's better to let the old name fade. Maybe it's easier that way. But something inside you rebels. Quietly, stubbornly, you begin to write poetry, even if no one reads it. You hum songs from your hometown when you're alone, even if they're considered unrefined. You trace characters in the condensation on your window. Sometimes your old name, sometimes a word like free or still. No one sees. No one needs to. These are small rituals, private and stubborn, and they are yours. Historians still wonder how many palace women carried double lives like this. How many queens held tight to pieces of themselves the court tried to erase. A few ancient scrolls hint at it, though never directly. A line of poetry, a phrase tucked into a letter. The peony blooms but knows not its name. Or, she answers to the wind, not the court. Quiet defiance, written in metaphor. Because open resistance would never be tolerated, not here. So you hold tight to your name in secret, even as your new title follows you everywhere like a well-dressed shadow. It's written on your door, embroidered into your robes, announced before your arrival at formal events. It comes with a certain weight. You are expected to live up to the poetic fantasy your name implies. If you are graceful willow, you must be soft and bending, but never break. If you are serene pearl, you must remain untroubled even as palace storms swirl around you. And so, your behavior becomes performance. You laugh when expected, bow when required, nod with just enough humility to maintain your place without seeming ambitious. You become good at this, too good, maybe, because one day, someone tells you you're perfectly suited to your role. And instead of pride, you feel something colder, detachment. You realize they're not complimenting you. They're praising the version of you that fits neatly into the Empire's plans. You begin to wonder how many other women were renamed this way. How many lives were folded neatly into new titles and tucked out of sight like old handkerchiefs. The palace keeps no record of your real name. When the scribes write your history, they will only know the one given to you here. If your name was Mei, or Lian, or Xiaolan, it will be gone, replaced by something floral and forgettable, a name that sounds elegant when read aloud during ceremonies, but means nothing to the people who truly knew you. That's the irony of it. You were renamed to be remembered, and in doing so, you were forgotten. You look at your reflection one day, catch it in a polished bronze mirror, faint and flickering like a ghost, and you whisper your old name. Just once, just softly. It feels strange on your tongue, like trying to sing a song you haven't heard in years. But still there. You're still there. Somewhere under all the robes and rules and rehearsed elegance. You tuck the memory away again, fold it gently like silk, and carry it inside you. You'll never speak it aloud in the palace halls, but it remains yours, unseen, unbroken, real. You wake to the sound of footsteps, not hurried ones, but soft, deliberate, like someone carefully navigating a chessboard made of polished stone. These aren't the footsteps of a soldier or a servant rushing with morning tea. They belong to another woman, one of many who live just like you, cloaked in silence and ceremony. You sit up slowly, not out of lethargy, but because rushing doesn't suit your rank anymore. And as your handmaid draws back the silk curtain, you remember, today is a presentation day. The phrase itself sounds pleasant, maybe even exciting, until you realize it means being arranged, assessed, and offered like a rare piece of lacquerware. Because here, in the shadowed layers of the Forbidden City, the Emperor doesn't have a queen. He has dozens, sometimes hundreds. A hierarchy so complex it's easier to memorize the stars. And you, no matter what name you were given, are just one of many options. There are ranks, of course, titles like noble consort, virtuous lady, and pure concubine. Each comes with its own privileges. A larger chamber, more silk allowances, perhaps even the right to speak directly to the Empress without waiting for a nod. But ultimately, all these titles orbit one person, the Emperor, and his favor is the currency that rules everything here. You may have been chosen for your grace, your lineage, your auspicious face shape. Yes, that's a thing. But once you're inside, it's a game of proximity. The closer you are to his attention, the more visible you become. The further away, the faster you fade. And the irony? You rarely even see him. Maybe once a week, maybe once a month, sometimes not for seasons at a time. And yet, your entire life is arranged around the possibility of those brief, flickering moments. You're not allowed to initiate contact. You can't just show up at his chambers and ask how his day went. You wait, always. And if you're summoned, there's an entire protocol. You are bathed, perfumed, dressed, painted, and inspected. The Emperor likes his concubines to smell like lotus or sandalwood, depending on the season. Your eyebrows must be shaped in a gentle curve, not too arched, that's considered bold, and your lips painted like a soft plum blossom. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not ask questions. You are offered like a poem, delicate, composed, and ideally forgettable if things go poorly. There's a ritual involved, even in intimacy. You're carried to him, sometimes literally, wrapped in a special silk quilt, as if your presence must remain unsullied by the floor. And once the night ends, you're taken back just as quietly. No lingering, no gulais, just a gentle return to your cold, echoing chamber and the long silence that follows. Historians still debate the number of women who lived like this, stacked in ranking orders, compartmentalized by beauty, kept idle in rooms full of hand-painted fans and embroidered cushions. Some say the emperor's harem was less a romantic affair and more a human filing cabinet. Beautiful, organized, and depressingly efficient. But there's no debate about what this meant for you. Every woman in the palace is your rival. Not openly, of course. Smiling is required. Politeness is enforced. But behind the layers of silk and incense, there is competition in every sideways glance, every casual remark about your hair being slightly out of season. You learn to play this game slowly. At first, it makes you nervous, the way compliments come with subtle barbs, how a poorly timed visit to the garden can become a whisper campaign about impropriety. But then you adapt. You start noticing who controls the tea distribution, which eunuchs are loyal to which ladies, who gets the best embroidery threads, and who mysteriously loses hairpins. You realize that power here isn't loud. It's measured in quiet privileges. How often the emperor visits your chambers, how warm your porridge is in the morning, how often your name appears on the nightly roster. Yes, there's a roster. Each evening, the emperor is presented with a small lacquered tray of name plaques. He picks one. That woman is summoned. The rest? They wait. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. You can't help but wonder what makes him choose. Is it memory? Political advice? The scent of the perfume you wore last time? Some say the Empress influences the list behind the scenes. Others believe it's all chance, that you're competing in a game where the rules change every night and no one tells you how to win. And here's the most absurd part. Even if he chooses you, even if you share a night, it doesn't mean security. Sometimes he remembers you. Sometimes he doesn't. You may be adored for a season and forgotten by the next. You might bear a child and still be pushed aside for someone younger, more entertaining, more politically useful. The emperor has options. Always. And while being chosen might elevate you for a time, it also paints a target on your back. The other women notice. The alliances shift. The smiles tighten. Being overlooked is painful, yes, but being favored is dangerous. You begin to understand why some women here seem so emotionally distant, so endlessly composed. They're protecting themselves from hope. Hope, in this place, is a vulnerability. So you practice detachment. You perfect the art of being interested without being invested. When the emperor does summon you, you smile. You charm. You listen. You perform. But afterward, you let it slip away like a dream you refuse to chase. You no longer measure your worth by how many times your name appears on a lacquer tray. Instead, you take quiet pride in small victories. An extra roll of silk, a visit from your father's envoy, a compliment from the Empress Dowager. These are the currency you trade now. And still, deep down, a part of you wishes to be seen. Truly seen. Not as graceful orchid or second-rank consort, but as the person you are beneath all this theater. That version of you only exists in stolen moments, in the flicker of candlelight before sleep, or in the quiet breath between one protocol and the next. You catch glimpses of her when you walk alone beneath the painted eaves of the covered corridors, where dragons chase clouds across the beams and time feels slightly softer. You wonder if the emperor ever sees that version of you. You doubt it. He doesn't have time for subtlety. He's busy running an empire, or at least being the figurehead while others run it in his name. You suspect he forgets most of your conversations within a week. And maybe that's a mercy. You don't have to pretend it meant something. You don't have to feel guilty when your name vanishes from the tray. Instead, you light your lantern, take a sip of plum wine, and watch the moths dance in its glow. Let the emperor have his options. Let him shuffle names like cards. You, in your own small way, have chosen something too, the quiet strength of detachment, the invisible grace of enduring. And in a palace where everyone is a performance, that might be the most radical act of all. Being beautiful in the imperial court is like owning a golden fishbowl. Lovely from the outside, but the water is still the same, tight, tepid, and full of others swimming in tight circles beside you. You were likely selected for your looks to begin with, of course. Not entirely, but enough. An upturned nose, pale skin untouched by sun, delicate wrists, or perhaps the quiet grace in how you bowed. All of it mattered, and none of it belonged to you anymore. Now it belongs to the palace, which observes you like a prized painting that must never fade or crack. Each day begins with grooming, not for your own enjoyment, but because your reflection is a political tool, a subtle instrument of leverage in a place where words are riskier than silk thread near flame. Your face must be a mask of serenity, your body an idealized version of femininity, sculpted not by desire, but by fear of becoming irrelevant. And if you're wondering whether beauty actually gets you far here, the answer is a very tired, very polite sometimes. You could catch the emperor's attention with a perfect hairstyle or the way your perfume lingers in a room like a memory. But it's never enough to keep you safe. In fact, beauty can be dangerous. Beauty is noticed, and being noticed means being envied. It means earning smiles that feel like sharpened fans and compliments that land like warnings. A beautiful woman in the Forbidden City must never seem to enjoy her beauty. That would make her arrogant. She must never seem unaware of it either. That would make her naive. Instead, she must balance in the space between acknowledgement and denial, like a tightrope dancer holding a mirror instead of a pole. You learn quickly that everything about your appearance is political. The color of your robes must not compete with those of women ranked higher than you. The way your hair is pinned can hint at ambition or humility, depending on its angle. Even the height of your shoes is watched. Walk too tall, and someone will whisper you're trying to elevate yourself beyond your station. And so you sculpt yourself carefully every day into the image expected of you. And yet, the rules never stay still. 1 month, the emperor prefers full lips. The next, he likes a smaller, more delicate mouth. Someone whispers that he's taken a liking to women with a slight dimple in their left cheek. And suddenly you see other concubines subtly pinching theirs before walking past him. You laugh, privately of course, because it's absurd. You're all like lotus flowers in a pond, bending slightly whichever way the wind of imperial preference blows. But laughter is rare. Instead, there are quiet tears wiped away behind beaded curtains, far from the eyes of rivals. Because for some, their beauty was all they had. And when it's no longer enough, when age creeps in or another face captures more attention, it's as if the palace itself exhales them. Slowly, quietly, without ceremony. Historians often romanticize these women. Poems have been written about their faces, their charm, their tragic decline into loneliness. But those poems don't mention the headaches from the weight of jeweled hairpins or the skin burns from overusing whitening powder. They don't speak of the constant fear that one wrinkle, one unfortunate mole, one failed smile might shift the court's favor away from you forever. There's something cruelly ironic about this. You're surrounded by luxury, bronze mirrors framed with dragons, combs inlaid with mother-of-pearl, silks dyed with rare flower pigments. Yet you are never truly allowed to own your appearance. You are merely curating it, daily, as though you are a museum exhibit, always on loan to someone else's vision. And so, you begin to detach from the mirror. You look without really seeing. You begin to think of your reflection as a kind of uniform, something you put on to survive the palace. It's not you. Not really. Just another layer of silk. One of the older women, Lady Wan, once told you a story while pouring tea with a trembling hand. She said, "There was once a girl so beautiful, the emperor visited her 3 nights in a row. On the 4th night, she laughed during a poetry recital. Not her turn. He never called for her again. You laugh softly now when you remember it, but not because it's funny. It's because it reminds you how fragile beauty is here, how quickly it can shift from a blessing to a threat. You start to notice the small details others miss. How the girl with the perfect eyes always avoids direct sunlight. How one of the consorts wears sleeves long enough to hide the bruises left by waist-binding cords. How a once favored lady now walks with a limp no one mentions, her smile tighter, her colors duller. You realize that beauty here isn't about freedom or joy. It's about survival. It's your shield, your bait, your trap. And yet, you still play the part. Because there is no other part. You let your maids paint your lips red with powdered petals. You accept the sting of cold jade rollers against your cheeks. You spend hours having your hair arranged in coils more complex than military strategy. You do it because this is what being a woman of the court requires. Not intelligence, not wit, not kindness. Those things help, but they're accessories. You're a portrait being constantly touched up, retouched, and occasionally replaced. And even though you long for someone, anyone, to see you underneath the lacquered mask, you don't expect it anymore. You catch a glimpse of yourself in the pond one day, reflected beside the outline of another concubine, and for a brief moment, you don't recognize yourself. You stare at the face, its serenity, its elegance, its perfect poise, and you think she looks like someone from a scroll painting. Then the realization hits. That's you. That's what you become. A beautiful image, framed by red pillars and gossip, floating silently down the halls of a palace that demands your perfection but never your presence. And in that moment, you wonder, not for the first time, what you would have looked like if you'd grown old in your village. If your smile had been allowed to deepen into laugh lines. If your hair had turned gray without consequence. If your body had changed without scrutiny. You wonder if anyone would have still called you beautiful then. And more importantly, if you would have cared. But those thoughts vanish like incense smoke. They're indulgent, dangerous. So you return to your reflection. You dab rose water under your eyes. You sit very still as your handmaiden adjusts your headdress. You prepare to be seen again, not for who you are, but for who they want you to be. Because here in the imperial court, being beautiful isn't about feeling beautiful. It's about remaining visible, and in a place that forgets women as quickly as it praises them. Visibility is all you have left. The palace hums and whispers. Not loud enough to echo, never strong enough to be traced, but always present, like wind stirring reeds or the delicate flick of a fan behind a sleeve. You've come to understand that this place, for all its rigid ceremony and scripted smiles, runs on what isn't said. The rules are etched into the stone, but survival? Survival is written between the lines, hidden in glances and phrased in sighs. You hear it in the way two concubines greet one another with flawless formality, while their eyes sharpen with every syllable. You feel it in the long pause before someone answers a question, in a way silence settles over the table when a favored consort enters the room. You begin to learn the language of veiled intent, where a compliment is rarely just a compliment, and how lovely you look can easily mean, I saw the emperor pass by your chambers last night. The words are soft. The meaning is not. There's power in being able to speak without saying anything. And while you once found it exhausting, this elaborate dance of facial expressions and tone, you now recognize it for what it is, strategy. The only real weapon available to you and the women around you. You watch as Lady Shui, once ignored and timid, begins to rise in the court not through beauty or title, but through conversation. Always gentle, never direct. Yet somehow she's seated closer to the Empress during formal events, and her chamber receives more fresh fruit than yours. She compliments the right robes, nods at the right jokes, offers sympathy at the precise moment it matters. And she never raises her voice. That's the thing. No one does. Not here. Rage is far too crude. Here, offense is delivered in the form of a poetic reference about wilting flowers. Disdain is expressed by being ever so slightly late to a scheduled tea. Affection? That's the rarest language of all, and often the most dangerous. You remember once, during an especially delicate gathering in the Plum courtyard, when Lady Jean laughed, just once, at something the Emperor said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't inappropriate. But it was genuine. And that was enough. Within a week, she'd been relocated to a more secluded chamber. No one said why. They never do. But the message was clear. Sincerity is an error. An error, in this place, is unacceptable. You learn to fold yourself into the rhythm of these whispers. You sit a little straighter during poetry recitations. You hold your teacup slightly longer before drinking, just enough to seem contemplative. You add faint metaphors into your speech, not because you like them, but because directness makes people nervous. Your words become careful flowers arranged to conceal thorns, and you notice others doing the same. Everyone in the court is fluent in this language. It's not taught. You absorb it like moisture from the palace walls. The servants, of course, know everything. The eunuchs glide silently, their eyes lowered but always observing. They speak even less than you, but they carry stories from chamber to chamber like pollen. Sometimes you catch a smile from one as he delivers your tea tray, and you wonder, what has he heard about you? What story are you in today? You ask no questions. You learn that pretending not to know is often safer than being informed. And yet, the weight of the unsaid fills every hallway. The way one concubine arranges her garden pebbles to subtly mimic the emperor's zodiac sign. The ink painting accidentally left unrolled, its imagery hinting at loyalty and longing. The discarded fan with a plum blossom motif, a not-so-subtle jab at another concubine's favored robe. Even the shadows participate. One night, you walk alone past a silk-screened window and hear a name whispered. Not yours, but close enough to make your pulse stutter. You keep walking. That's the rule. Always keep walking. In this palace, knowing who said what and to whom is like holding a lantern in the dark. Useful, but it makes you visible too. Better to move like mist, silent, shapeless, always listening. You find yourself drawn to the older women, those who've survived 3 or 4 emperors, whose voices have grown softer not from age, but from practiced discretion. They speak in riddles. A tree with too many blossoms draws wind. One says, folding a handkerchief with mathematical precision. Another murmurs, even a jade comb cracks if pressed too tightly. You nod, as if you understand. And in time you do, because everything in the palace is double-layered. The robes, the etiquette, the conversations. Truth floats beneath the surface, and if you want to survive, you have to read the undercurrents. The Empress is a master of it. She smiles warmly during the morning incense ceremony, offering you a small plum pastry with her own hand. A kindness, a gesture of goodwill. But you notice the glance she gives your headdress, slightly too ornate for your rank. You feel the subtle reminder in her eyes. You bow lower the next time. Offer your own pastries 2 days later. Not out of fear, but because that's how the game is played. No direct confrontation. No open conflict. Just quiet corrections. Like music notes in a lullaby, no one admits they're humming. And still, there are moments, brief, flickering, when something real surfaces. Aside from a concubine whose son died young. A tear wiped quickly after a rare audience with the emperor. A lingering touch on a silk sleeve during a particularly cold morning. But they vanish almost immediately, swallowed by protocol. You pretend not to see. They pretend not to feel. And everything goes on. You realize that the court is not ruled by power. Not truly. It's ruled by suggestion, by the half-spoken, by the emotional sleight of hand. And once you learn that, once you begin to participate fully, you feel yourself changing. Your voice softens. Your posture tightens. You think 3 times before speaking, 5 times before acting. You learn to say thank you in a way that can mean I forgive you, I hate you, or I'm watching you. You master the eyebrow lift, the wrist flick, the breath pause. You become unreadable. And in doing so, you become safer. Or so you tell yourself. But sometimes when the moon is high and the courtyard silent, you sit by your window and whisper things just to hear your own voice again. Real words, uncoded, unmeasured, unheard. You talk about your old home, the smell of wet earth, the thrill of laughter. You say your mother's name. You say your own. Just once. Because here, where everyone speaks in riddles, the most radical act might be telling the truth. Morning arrives not with joy, but with drums, low and steady, like a heartbeat that doesn't quite belong to you. You open your eyes before your maid enters because you've trained yourself to rise just moments before she knocks. That way, you maintain control over the first few seconds of your day. It's a small rebellion, one no one notices, but it feels important, like keeping a secret in plain sight. As she dresses you, layer after layer, you wonder what version of you will step into the palace this morning. There are many: the quiet listener, the humble supporter, the almost favored one. But today, you will play the dutiful witness. You're scheduled to attend a tribunal, a soft-sounding word for what is essentially a performance of order, a theater of consequence. These tribunals happen often, and they rarely lead to justice. They're more about preserving appearance than truth. A consort may be accused of insubordination for walking too close to the emperor's dais, or a maid may be accused of stealing hair oil because her eyes lingered too long near someone's vanity. Whether anyone actually did anything wrong is beside the point. The accusation is enough to stir tension. And tension, here, is the palace's true currency. You've attended enough of these rituals to know how they unfold. First, silence. Heavy, unbroken, held like breath. Then the arrival of the accused, always with head bowed, steps careful, as though the air itself is brittle. This time it's Lady Roan, whose name has been uttered a bit too often in the tea houses outside the walls. They say she caught the emperor's attention with a single look, something about her eyes being like thunderclouds about to break. Poets eat that sort of thing up, but apparently the Empress does not. And now here she is, kneeling on stone, robes askew, face unreadable. You know better than to meet her eyes. Not because you fear her, but because locking gazes with the accused marks you as a participant, not an observer. And in the palace, being seen as involved is always dangerous. So you lower your gaze, let your expression settle into the neutral serenity expected of your rank. All around you, the other women do the same. It's a symphony of stillness. When the Empress finally speaks, her voice is calm. Too calm. Lady Roan, it has come to our attention that you have failed to observe the expected propriety of your station. A vague accusation. That's intentional. Specific charges would limit the court's flexibility. Vague ones allow for maximum punishment with minimum explanation. Lady Roan responds in a whisper. You can't make out the words, but they don't matter. Her fate was likely decided before she even entered the courtyard. This is just the ceremony, the performance of justice, staged with all the delicate cruelty of a shadow puppet play. Still, you feel a flicker of something as she lifts her head. Not defiance. She's too smart for that, but clarity. Acceptance, maybe, or exhaustion. You wonder what she's thinking. Whether she regrets whatever she did or didn't do. Whether she's mourning her loss of standing or simply her loss of comfort. Being punished doesn't always mean exile. Sometimes it means demotion. A smaller chamber. Fewer servants. The worst fate is rarely death. It's being forgotten. A life of slow fading. Her sentence is delivered with grace. You will be relocated to the Pavilion of Still Waters until further notice. A lovely name for a building that sits far from the central court, where visitors rarely tread and whispers don't carry. A place for women who are neither disgraced enough to be removed, nor important enough to be remembered. As she is led away, you catch the faint rustle of silk and the creak of her bamboo slippers. It sounds like the last lines of a poem no one will finish. The tribunal ends without applause, without commentary. It simply dissolves like dew under morning sun. You rise with the others and bow. Eyes ahead, emotions folded neatly and tucked beneath your sleeves. This is how the palace maintains balance. Not through fairness, but through spectacle. Justice isn't about what is right. It's about what is useful. And in this case, Lady Rome's removal has already done its job. It reminds you all of the invisible leash wrapped around your ambitions. You return to your chamber, your feet silent against the stone walkways, and think about what just happened. Not because you're shocked. It takes more than that now. But because you know it could easily have been you. Maybe someday it will be. You recall that just last season, Lady Rome was celebrated for her embroidery work. Her plum blossom panel was displayed in the Hall of Harmonious Virtue. The Emperor praised it in front of everyone. A hand that knows the seasons, he had said. You remember the flicker of envy you felt. You remember thinking she was getting too bold, too visible, and now, gone, reduced to whispers and memory. You're not supposed to dwell on these things. Reflection breeds hesitation, and hesitation invites error. But it's impossible not to notice the pattern. Rise too quickly, and you're pulled back down. Shine too brightly, and someone dims the lantern. The palace prefers a steady glow, nothing that casts shadows. You're reminded of a proverb your nursemaid once told you. The bird that sings loudest is the first to fall. It sounded dramatic when you were a child. Now it feels like prophecy. And so you retreat further into yourself. You practice the art of being forgettably graceful. You keep your opinions soft, your preferences vague. When others speak, you nod with the right amount of interest, but never too much. You offer help without offering ideas. You learn how to float, present, but untouchable. Still, part of you aches. Not for Lady Rome herself. You didn't know her well, but for what she represents, the fragility of position, the illusion of safety. You wonder how many other women are watching you now, calculating your rise, weighing whether your silence means strength or weakness. You wonder if someone, somewhere, has already begun stitching a rumor with your name in it. You whisper a quiet prayer to the moon that night. Not to rise, not to be seen, but simply to last. Because here in the palace, longevity is the closest thing to victory. You sit at your table, brushing ink across a rice scroll, and write a line you won't sign. Even still water drowns if held long enough. Then you dry the page, roll it tight, and tuck it into the seam of your robe. Not for anyone else, just to remind yourself that you saw what happened, that you understood, and that for now, you're still here, that it's hard to describe what silence truly feels like until you've lived in the imperial palace, where it wears robes and walks beside you like an old, watchful friend. Silence here is not the absence of noise. It's the presence of everything unsaid, everything felt, everything withheld out of self-preservation. You become fluent in it, as if it were a second tongue. Sometimes it's a balm, a quiet space where your thoughts are allowed to exhale. But more often, silence is tension wrapped in silk, coiled beneath the floorboards of ceremony. You feel it especially during your midday rituals, when the sun slants through the lattice windows and casts strange shadows over your lap, and you're required to sit perfectly still while a court poet reads verses so thick with metaphor, they may as well be riddles. You nod in appreciation, of course, everyone does. But the true performance isn't in the poetry. It's in the stillness, the serene blankness you wear like a second face. You become so practiced at that expression, you worry one day it might become permanent. Still, there's a strange kind of power in mastering stillness, in not reacting, not blinking when someone makes a passing comment about a new concubine being so youthful she could be mistaken for a lotus bud. Not flinching when a eunuch delivers news that your cousin back home is marrying into a family with more horses than yours ever owned. Not betraying a hint of longing when another woman is summoned to the emperor's chamber 3 nights in a row. You train yourself to sit with these feelings, bury them like contraband beneath layers of silk and scented powder. This is what the court demands. Not just compliance, but composure. Outbursts are for children and storytellers, not imperial consorts. If you must cry, you do it at night with your cheek pressed to the cool edge of your lacquered pillow, your sobs so soft they sound like breath. But most of the time, you don't cry. You grow quiet, and that quiet hardens. You feel it in your chest, like lacquer drying over wood. Solid, unmoving, and in time, you stop reaching for noise. Even your dreams become hushed. They float through your sleep in soft, wordless blurs, memories without dialogue, regrets without monologues. You wake often, not startled, but subtly unsettled, as if your own thoughts have become too shy to speak. You try, sometimes, to remember your laughter. Real laughter. The kind that used to burst out of you back home, when your sister made fun of the local scholar's floppy hat, or when your father slipped in a rice paddy and came up with a frog in his sleeve. Those memories feel distant now. Not erased, but faded like ink that's been left too long in the sun. And here in the palace, no one encourages laughter unless it's graceful. Dainty, contained, no unseemly snorts, no belly-holding gasps. You hear laughter, of course, at banquets, during the lantern festivals from behind curtained chambers, but it's always trimmed at the edges. Cultivated, polished, the kind of laughter that doesn't make noise unless you're expected to hear it. And maybe that's why the silence cuts deeper. Because when everything is performative, silence is the only honest sound left. You carry it with you, even into the gardens, where everything is designed to distract you from what you're feeling. The imperial gardens are a masterpiece of manipulation. Winding stone paths, koi ponds perfectly arranged to reflect the willows, pavilions built just crooked enough to appear spontaneous. But even here, amidst the birdsong and the lotus blossoms, the silence follows. You nod politely at the other women you pass. Smile softly. They smile back, but you both know what you're really saying. I see you. I'm watching you. Don't trust me. Some of the women walk with books tucked under their arms, pretending to be engrossed in literature. Others carry musical instruments they barely play. Everyone's trying to look just engaged enough to seem refined, but not so absorbed they forget the rules. The garden is not just for peace, it's for being seen. You learn to sit with poise beneath the ginkgo tree near the reflecting pool. Not because it's your favorite spot, though it is, but because it's visible from the walkway the emperor sometimes uses during his evening stroll. You don't expect him to stop. You rarely expect anything anymore. But you understand the importance of being in the right place at the right time in the right pose. The art of stillness, once again, one day, as you sit there pretending to read a scroll of poetry, you overhear two attendants speaking in hurried whispers. One of them mentions Lady May, how she's taken ill, how no one is allowed to visit her. There's tension in their voices, the kind that wraps around your ribs. You know what this means. Illness in the palace is not just physical, it's political. If someone of her rank is sick, it will be downplayed or concealed unless it becomes too obvious to ignore. And if it is ignored, she might simply vanish. Not because anyone wished her harm, but because no one wanted to be involved. That's the cruelty of silence here. It doesn't need to act. It just needs to wait. And so you say nothing. You look down at your scroll. You nod thoughtfully, as if absorbing a particularly poignant metaphor. Later that evening, your maid tells you in a hushed tone that Lady May has been moved to the quiet courtyard. You know the place, far on the eastern edge of the complex, surrounded by high walls and guarded gates. Not exactly punishment, but certainly not comfort, and certainly not recovery. You lie awake that night, listening to the cicadas clicking their relentless rhythm outside your window, and you wonder how long you'll last here. You're not being dramatic. It's a real question. You count the women who arrived when you did. More than half are gone. A few married off, others demoted, some mysteriously reassigned. One or two simply disappeared into rumor. Their names are no longer spoken at meals. Their portraits removed from the seasonal wall scrolls. Their silence has become permanent. And you wonder, how much of this is survival and how much is surrender? You remember your first week in the palace. How overwhelmed you felt by the protocols, the coldness of the stone floors, the impersonal kindness of the senior consorts. Someone tried to warn you back then. An older woman, whose name you've also forgotten, said, "Don't let silence become your only language." You didn't understand what she meant. Now you do. Silence is safety, but it can also be a cage. The less you speak, the less they know. The less they know, the less they can use against you. But eventually, you forget what your voice sounds like. You forget how to want things out loud. You start to believe that stillness is virtue. That detachment is grace. That invisibility is the only way to be safe. And maybe it is, but it's also a kind of death. You begin to write small notes to yourself. Not every day, just when the quiet becomes too loud. Short sentences, sometimes a memory, sometimes a wish. You fold them into cranes and tuck them inside your pillowcase. You never open them again. That's not the point. The point is that for a moment, you said something. For a moment, you weren't just a reflection. You were a voice. And even if no one hears it, even if it echoes only in your own ribs, it is yours. The palace clock ticks in ways you can't see, not with gears or bells, but through a slow choreography of season changes, hairpins swapped for winter flowers, and the hush that descends when the chrysanthemum blooms signal the emperor's retreat into private rituals. Time here doesn't move forward so much as fold inward, looping like silk being wound onto a spool. But tonight, time breaks its pattern, just slightly, as a summons arrives, unexpected and silent, carried by a eunuch whose face reveals nothing. Your name is spoken in that breathless tone that makes your stomach tighten. Not with joy, never with joy, but with something sharp and uncertain. You nod, composed, trained for this exact moment. Inside, your thoughts scatter like spilled ink. It has been weeks since your last summons. Weeks of measured smiles and invisible posture corrections, of planting yourself where the emperor might stroll and laughing at all the right metaphors during poetry readings. You never expect to be chosen. But now, you must become ready. The preparations begin at once. Your chamber flares to life in quiet panic. Maids fetching heated rose water for your bath. Unwrapping silk garments, so finely embroidered they whisper when touched. Unrolling the scent scroll to choose the right combination. Sandalwood for composure, jasmine for appeal. You try not to think as they scrub your skin, comb your hair, rouge your lips. You know how this works, how quickly favor can be given, how silently it can be taken away. Tonight is not a gift. It is a test. You feel it in the silence of your attendants, the way none of them look you in the eye as they pin your headdress in place. You feel it in the heavy drape of the embroidered gown, designed not to please you, but to present you. When they finish, you are transformed. Not a woman, not even a person, but an image. A statement, a possibility. You are escorted by torchlight, past walls you've seen 1,000 times, and yet barely know, corridors that twist like thoughts you aren't allowed to finish. The palace at night is quiet, but not peaceful. It feels suspended, held in place by all the things that are happening behind closed doors. You walk with your hands clasped, eyes lowered, back straight. It doesn't matter how you feel. It matters only how you appear. The room you're brought to is warm, perfumed with cedar and citrus, dimmed just enough to blur the edges of reality. The emperor is there, reclined, speaking softly with a minister who vanishes with the quiet efficiency of someone practiced in disappearing. You bow, and when he speaks your name, you smile, not too wide, not too familiar. He gestures for you to sit, and your mind begins cataloging every word, every pause. You respond with practiced ease, offering compliments woven with just enough sincerity to sound unrehearsed. He asks about your painting, and you mention a scroll you're working on, plum blossoms in winter. Symbolic, but not provocative. Everything you say must be pleasant and pointless, a dance of words meant to flatter without burdening. You talk, you listen, you sip warm plum wine, your fingers resting lightly against the porcelain cup, because he once said he liked hands that looked thoughtful. You try to be thoughtful, but inside, you are calculating everything. The temperature of the room, the length of the silences, the way his eyes linger or do not. You remember Lady Jeanne once told you the emperor prefers when women lower their gaze while laughing. Another said he likes the scent of dried osmanthus. You file away these scraps of trivia like precious coins. Tonight, he seems in a curious mood. He tells a story from his childhood, something about a swallow nesting in the eaves of his study. And you laugh at the right places, ask questions softly, offer your own brief tale of a kitten from your village. You do not mention longing or family or anything that could be considered personal. He doesn't want honesty. He wants lightness. He wants comfort. You give it to him like a gift you wrapped weeks ago, knowing it might be unwrapped carelessly. Eventually, he grows quiet. He looks at you in a way that makes your breath pause. Not because it's romantic, but because it's uncertain. He is a man who controls an empire, and yet he looks as though he's trying to remember where he left something. You wonder if it's his affection or his patience. When he reaches for your hand, you offer it. When he draws you closer, you move without question. You know this part too. The intimacy is not painful. It's distant, almost ritualistic. Like serving tea in a ceremony where the meaning was lost generations ago. You lie beside him when it's over, quiet, aware of every breath he takes. You study the ceiling's painted clouds, and for a moment, you allow yourself to imagine what it would be like to speak freely. To say, I am tired. To say, do you even remember the name I had before the palace renamed me? But you say nothing. Eventually, he sleeps. And then, quietly, a eunuch appears, bowing low, indicating it's time to leave. You are wrapped in the ceremonial quilt, your face hidden by silk, and guided back to your chambers before the moon reaches its highest arc. Once inside, your maids remove your gown without words. One of them brushes your hair, the strokes gentle and slow, as though she's combing away the memory of the evening. You sit motionless, trying to remember if he smiled at you or if you only imagined it. You wonder if this changes anything. If tomorrow, your name will be moved higher on the slate of favored consorts. If the Empress will send you different pastries. If Lady Shui will raise an eyebrow in the garden. You wonder, and then you stop wondering, because you've learned not to expect. You've learned that in the Forbidden City, closeness means little without consistency. That a night of warmth can be followed by months of ice. And yet, you feel changed, only slightly but enough. Not because you were chosen, but because you went and returned and survived the uncertainty of being seen. You know that you've been added to the palace's internal ledger. Noted, weighed, placed. And now you must wait. Days pass. The emperor does not summon you again. Not yet. But new silk is delivered to your quarters. Fresh lychees, your favorite, are served with breakfast. You receive a new scroll of poetry, and signed, placed delicately on your table. These are not declarations. They are suggestions, hints, threads of meaning you must interpret. You hold a scroll in your hands, unroll it slowly. It's a poem about moonlight over water. You read it twice, carefully. There is no mention of you, of course, but the ink is still fresh. It's enough, just enough to keep you suspended between dread and hope. The sweet tension the palace cultivates like a greenhouse flower. You lie on your bed that night, arms folded over your silk blanket, and close your eyes not in peace, but in posture. Even in sleep, you remain composed, because the palace watches even in dreams. And tonight, it knows your name. The days grow shorter, and so do your breaths. More measured now, drawn with intention, as if the cold creeping into the palace corridors is something you must inhale with grace. Autumn has taken hold, and the leaves in the imperial gardens turn brittle gold, crunching like secrets under the feet of passing courtiers. There's a chill in the marble floors, a bite in the wind that slips through even the most tightly shuttered windows, and you find yourself wrapping your robe a little tighter, your silks no longer soft but stiffer from the extra lining. This shift in weather signals more than just seasonal change. It marks the annual migration of attention. As the emperor retreats into the hall of tranquil harmony for colder months, fewer women are summoned. The court shrinks, contracts turns inward. The outer courtyards grow quieter, like stages between performances. In this lull, something strange happens. People start remembering things. Petty grievances thaw from polite dormancy. Forgotten slights get retold over tea. Stories you'd hoped were buried, or at least misremembered, now surface like carp in a too-still pond. The palace, in its silence, turns gossipy. Not loud gossip, of course, just the polite kind, the kind that wears a smile and smells faintly of sandalwood. You hear your name mentioned once, in passing. She has a quiet strength, someone says behind a fan. But the way it's said, it could mean respect. It could mean warning. It could mean watch her. You don't react. You never do. But inside a flicker, the understanding that every whispered remark is an invisible thread, and soon you may be caught in the web of it all. The Empress begins hosting more indoor events, calligraphy sessions, chess exhibitions, storytelling evenings where everyone sits too still for too long, laughing too lightly at the eunuch's anecdotes. You attend them all, of course. Declining would be noticed. But participating too much? Also dangerous. You perfect the art of presence without participation. You sit near enough to be seen, far enough to be overlooked. You comment just enough to be courteous, never enough to be memorable. The women around you, however, grow restless. You can feel it, their ambitions pacing like caged tigers beneath their silk layers. When there are fewer chances to be seen by the emperor, the need to be seen by each other multiplies. You watch as Lady Een begins arriving at every event in slightly brighter hues, just outside the official color guide. A calculated risk. Lady Hong has taken to writing poems, melancholy ones, about frost and fading flowers. Everyone praises her subtlety, but you suspect it's less about art and more about performance. Winter is when the forgotten fight to be remembered. You, however, feel the cold settling differently. Not just in your bones, but in your thinking. A slowing down. A kind of quiet exhaustion that doesn't feel like sadness exactly, but something close to it. You wake before sunrise and sit by the lattice window, watching your breath fog the glass. You listen for the morning bells and try to guess how many more times you'll hear them before spring arrives. The answer is always too many. And so, in this season of withdrawal, you begin a ritual of your own. A small one. You take to walking the long gallery alone in the early hours. It stretches between the main courtyard and the winter orchid pavilion, decorated with intricate paintings of mountains, cranes, and endless pine trees. You walk slowly, your sleeves tucked against the breeze, memorizing the rhythm of your own footsteps. No one stops you. No one joins you. Perhaps they assume you are praying or unraveling. You don't mind which. In these walks, you feel briefly untethered from the court's invisible grip. There is a comfort in repetition. Step after step, one painting after another. Crane, pine, crane, plum. You begin to think of time not as days or seasons, but as a series of images passed like beads through your hands. And here, in this quiet space, your thoughts begin to wander in directions you didn't expect. You remember your old friend from before the palace. Her name was Mingzhu. She had a crooked tooth and a laugh that sounded like it surprised her every time. You haven't thought of her in years, but now she comes back in flashes. Her muddy shoes, her clever tongue, the way she insisted she'd never marry if it meant giving up her afternoon naps. You wonder what happened to her, whether she kept her promise, whether she too has felt this kind of quiet stretch out inside her. These memories stir something else, something you've been keeping still. The knowledge that you had a life before this. Not just a childhood, but a personality. Preferences. Dislikes. You liked bitter melon. You hated the sound of drums. You once wanted to see the ocean. None of that fits here. The palace has no use for desires that reach beyond its walls. But in the privacy of your morning walks, you let them exist. You imagine the sea, not in vivid, romantic detail, but simply as a place where sound moves freely, where no one is listening to your silence and reading it like scripture. And then the wind picks up, tugging your sleeve, and you're reminded of where you are. The paintings end. The corridor loops. Time resumes. Later that day, during an embroidery session with the Empress, she remarks on your stitching. Precise, she says, but restrained. You nod. You know it's not a compliment. It's an assessment. You're being measured. Still. Always. She pauses before moving to the next woman, and you feel it again. That silent weighing. As if she's trying to place you, to decide what sort of piece you are in this eternal game of courtly chess. You think about how, if you were ever to fall out of favor, it might not be because you made a mistake, but because you failed to stand out, because you stitched too quietly, because your name didn't rise with the smoke of incense into the emperor's thoughts. That night, sleep doesn't come easily. You lie awake, watching the shadows from the paper lantern dance across your ceiling, and you begin to wonder, what is the cost of always being safe? You've done everything right. You've offended no one. You played your part with care. But the palace is not a place that rewards neutrality. It rewards spectacle, memory, legacy. And if you don't become one of those things, what do you become? A footnote? A robe in a back chamber? A faded name on a forgotten scroll? And yet, to step into the spotlight here is to risk everything. You close your eyes and hear your own footsteps in the gallery. You picture the endless cranes, the pine trees, the curve of the painted mountains. You whisper Mingzhu's name into the dark, just to hear yourself say it. And in that moment, you realize you're still here, still walking, still choosing silence. Not because you've forgotten how to speak, but because you're waiting for the right moment to say something that matters. Or maybe just to hear your own voice echo back without fear. The palace changes with the first snow, and not in the way you might expect. Not with joy, not with that storybook sense of wonder, but with a deeper hush, like the whole complex exhales and freezes in place. Snow here is not festive. It's ceremonial. It arrives in silent flurries, blanketing rooftops and courtyards, dusting the carved dragons and cranes that adorn every beam. You wake one morning to find the world outside your window changed, made softer, yes, but also more fragile. And in the Forbidden City, fragility is not romantic. It's dangerous. Snow muffles footsteps, obscures trails, covers cracks in marble. And for those living lives measured in appearances and impressions, it becomes another layer to navigate. The palace staff adjusts quickly. Paths are swept hourly. Salt is scattered. Robes grow heavier. The Empress declares that all women of the court must wear pale blue until spring. To reflect harmony, she says, though everyone knows it's to ensure visual unity during the upcoming winter festival, where appearances are everything. You watch as individuality folds into frost. Lady Een complains, lightly, that blue washes her out. Lady Hong orders new silks with silver embroidery to compensate. You remain silent, as usual, knowing that even your silence now has color. The palace's rhythms shift. Morning incense is lit earlier. Meals are hotter, but less elaborate, and the emperor becomes harder to reach. His chambers stay warm, filled with conversation, but the names of the women summoned grow more selective. You are not among them. Not for days. Not for weeks. You know better than to show disappointment. Instead, you immerse yourself in the rituals of winter. You trace poems into frost on your window. You sip ginger tea slowly, like each drop might anchor you. You begin stitching a landscape. Pine trees in a storm, inked in blues and whites. Your own private defiance beneath the Empress's rules. The maids comment on it. So peaceful, one says. But you know it's not. There's a wildness in that scene, a chaos buried beneath stillness. Just like here. And then one afternoon, during a calligraphy demonstration, you hear a sound so rare it doesn't register at first. a laugh. Not a courtly chuckle, not a controlled titter. A real laugh. It echoes across the hall, and heads turn so fast they might snap. The source? Lady Jeanne. Of course. She's new, barely a season in, and beautiful in the way that doesn't need help. Her laugh is pure sunlight, and in this cold room, it's offensive. The Empress doesn't react. She doesn't have to. A smile, a nod, a glance at her handmaid is enough. The rest will follow. And so it does. Over the next week, Lady Jeanne becomes less visible. She skips a poetry reading due to headaches. Her seat at the chess exhibition is moved 3 cushions down. The rumors begin, small things. She's too bold. She's disrespectful. She speaks too often of home. And you realize, with a chill sharper than the wind, that it's happening again. The slow unraveling. The quiet erasure. Just like Lady Rome. Just like so many before. You don't feel joy. You don't feel pity. You feel the weight of inevitability. You walk the long gallery, now colder than ever, your sleeves heavy with lining, your breath fogging in short bursts. And you think about what makes someone stay. What makes someone disappear? Lady Jeanne's mistake wasn't laughter. It was forgetfulness. She forgot the rules. Or worse, she remembered them and chose not to care. Either way, the palace does not forgive that kind of warmth. And then something shifts. A message arrives, not from the emperor, but from the Office of Ritual Affairs. You are to assist in planning the winter solstice ceremony. A high honor, a risk. You're not the most senior, not the most favored. So why you? You wonder if it's a reward or a trap. But in the palace, questioning intent is as pointless as asking the snow why it falls. You accept. The preparations begin. The solstice ceremony is the crown of the winter calendar, a lavish display of unity, devotion, and hierarchy. Every fold of silk, every flower petal, every incense strand must be perfect. You meet with court artists and ritual masters, poring over ancient texts to ensure nothing offends tradition. You memorize protocols so convoluted they could only have been designed by a sleep-deprived deity. You learn the exact degree to which a noblewoman should bow when offering a seasonal gift to the Empress, low enough to show deference, not so low as to suggest groveling. The balance is delicate. Like everything here, as the ceremony draws near, your nerves begin to show. Not in your face, never in your voice, but in the way your fingers tremble when threading your needle, in the way your steps falter as you cross the snow-slick courtyard. The day arrives. The courtyard is transformed. Lanterns strung like constellations. Snow sculptures flanking the staircases. Every color faded to silver and ice blue. You stand in the second row, flanked by 2 women who will not look at you. That's fine. You're not here to be seen. You're here to witness. The emperor arrives beneath a canopy of brocade and pine. He looks tired, regal, distant. You lower your gaze. The ceremony begins. Prayers are offered, poems recited. Music floats through the frozen air, plucked gently from zither, tuned to minor keys. And then it's your turn. You step forward with the scroll. Your scroll, the solstice poem you chose, revised, copied onto gold-flecked rice paper by a monk with trembling hands. You hold it like it's fragile, like it might dissolve if looked at too hard. You kneel, raise it, and wait. The emperor accepts it without a word. He nods, a small one, barely perceptible, and yet your heart stutters. You step back in a line. The ceremony ends. Applause, quiet and elegant, like rain on silk. But later, after the guests disperse and the lanterns are extinguished, you find something in your chamber. A package, unmarked. Inside, a new brush. Handmade, balanced, lacquered in black with your name etched in faint characters near the base. There's no note. There doesn't need to be. You know what it means. The emperor saw. The emperor approved. And though your name might not be spoken tomorrow, tonight it matters. Just a little. Enough to keep you breathing. Enough to carry you through the next storm. Because in the Forbidden City, favors frost. It touches gently, melts quickly, and always leaves behind the possibility of return. Winter deepens like ink soaking slowly into parchment, seeping into every corner of the Forbidden City until even the courtyards begin to feel like sealed rooms, and the world beyond the palace walls becomes something distant and dreamlike. The snow has stopped falling, but it lingers in thick, heavy drifts along the eaves and against the doors, muffling sound, erasing footprints almost as soon as they're made. The chill outside has begun to seep into the marrow of daily life. Your fingers ache when you hold your brush too long, and your breath clouds the mirror when you lean in to pin your hair, the condensation making your reflection seem ghost-like, as if you're watching someone else play your role. Inside your chambers, the brazier burns day and night, its flickering warmth a small defiance against the relentless cold, but the coals are rationed carefully, and the warmth is never more than just enough. Most of the other women huddle indoors now, swathed in layer upon layer of embroidered wool and fur-trimmed silk, speaking in low voices over hot tea, their ambitions temporarily slowed by the cold. But you take to walking. Not often, not far, but sometimes in the hour just before dusk, when the sun turns the snow the color of old ivory and the sky blushes faintly pink, you slip on your heaviest robe, wrap your sleeves around your hands, and walk the perimeter of the southern courtyard. No one stops you. Perhaps they think you're praying. Perhaps they think you're unraveling. It hardly matters. The solitude feels like oxygen. You walk past the stone lanterns with their roofs weighted by snow, past the withered remains of last season's chrysanthemums, and let the wind press against your face until your cheeks sting and your eyes water. Not with sadness, but with cold. It's a kind of cleansing, a way to remind yourself that you are still alive, still here, still capable of moving under your own will, however quietly. These walks become a rhythm, a ritual, and on one particular evening, as the sky darkens and the moon begins to rise, round and pale as a porcelain plate, you see something strange. A shadow moves across the garden wall. Slow, deliberate. A figure, slender, swaying slightly, almost like it's dancing. At first you think it must be a trick of the light or a passing servant. But as you edge closer, careful not to let your boots crunch too loudly in the snow, you see her. Lady Jeanne. Her robe is too thin for the weather, her hair unpinned, falling in messy waves over her shoulders. She's moving slowly, barefoot in the snow, her arms raised as if conducting music only she can hear. You freeze, not out of fear, but out of something more complicated. She looks both beautiful and broken, luminous and lost, like a painting left out in the rain. You know you should turn away. You know the right thing, the safe thing, is to forget this happened. But still you watch, only for a moment, long enough to see her pause, lower her arms, and tilt her head toward the sky. Then she's gone, vanished into the folds of the courtyard like smoke. You return to your room in silence. That night, you can't sleep. You lie awake, the quilt heavy on your chest, and wonder what you just saw. Was it madness? Was it freedom? Or was it some quiet protest the rest of you had forgotten how to make? The next morning, Lady Jeanne is absent from the meal hall. Not unusual, not remarked upon. But 3 days later, a quiet announcement arrives. She has been reassigned to the Pavilion of Returning Winds. You know the name. Everyone does. It's a beautiful title for a place that's essentially a gilded cage, an isolated building in the far north wing, where women who are too bold, too broken, or simply too much are sent under the guise of recovery. Sometimes they return. Sometimes they don't. No one speaks of her again. You keep your thoughts to yourself, but they settle inside you like seeds. You find yourself thinking of her movements, fluid, strange, and somehow entirely honest. You think about what it would take to move like that, barefoot in the snow, uncaring of consequence. You try to imagine yourself doing it. You can't. Not yet. But the idea lingers. Meanwhile, preparations for the Lantern Festival begin, even though it's still weeks away. The palace must always be ready ahead of time. And the responsibility for selecting this year's design theme falls to the Empress's council. You're asked to assist again, another subtle recognition, another test. You accept, of course, always. Your job is to sort through proposals from artisans across the empire. Designs for lanterns shaped like dragons, plum blossoms, phoenixes mid-flight. Some are breathtaking. Others feel like recycled ideas from past years. But one sketch catches your eye. It's simple. A lantern shaped like a fish. Its mouth open, tail curved, the entire body painted in delicate patterns of blue ink and gold. There's something about it. The suggestion of movement. The idea of swimming, of gliding just beneath the surface. You recommend it. Quietly, confidently. The Empress agrees. The fish becomes the festival symbol. And suddenly your name carries a little more weight. Still whispered, but now with a different tone. Admiration, maybe, or envy. It's hard to tell. The palace is a house of mirrors. Everything reflected. Nothing entirely real. You take the approval as you always do, with bowed head, measured words, and a smile that doesn't reach your eyes. But inside, something flickers. The fish is a symbol of luck, of resilience, of survival. And maybe, in some quiet way, it's also yours. That night, when you return to your room, you light a single candle and draw the fish from memory. Over and over. Dozens of them. Some swimming left. Some right. Some in circles. It feels like exhaling. Like remembering a story you thought was lost. One of the maids sees the sketches, but says nothing. Just collects your empty teacup and exits without a word. You let her go. Let the door click closed. Let the quiet fill the room like water. And then you begin folding the drawings into small origami figures. You tuck them into the sleeve of your robe. You don't know what you'll do with them. Not yet, but it feels important to carry them. To keep them close. The days crawl forward. The snow begins to melt. Not quickly, but just enough that the icicles on the roof start dripping in rhythm. Just enough that the stone paths grow slick. Just enough that you can begin to believe in the idea of thaw. And with it, something in you begins to stir. You don't laugh out loud. You don't run barefoot through the courtyard. But you walk a little faster. You look a little longer at the sky. You find yourself humming under your breath when no one is around. Not a song, just sound. Your voice. Soft, unapologetic, still yours. The Lantern Festival arrives beneath a sky like brushed obsidian, clear and cold. The moon hovering above the forbidden city as if holding its breath, and everything below it flickers in a sea of golden light. The palace, for one night, feels less like a fortress and more like a dream, draped in silk banners and lit by thousands of lanterns, dangling from eaves, swaying from branches, floating along narrow canals like tiny glowing spirits with nowhere to go. You step out into this vision, swathed in pale, silver robes, your hair adorned with pearl-tipped pins that catch the firelight. And for the first time in many long weeks, you do not feel quite so invisible. Around you, music drifts, gentle plucking of zither and the soft thrum of flutes played by musicians stationed like ghosts in the alcoves. The scent of almond cakes and sesame sweets carries on the breeze, sweet and fleeting, while laughter rises from the junior attendants like steam. You move slowly through it all, part of the scenery and yet apart from it, absorbing every detail. The embroidered sleeves brushing against your arm, the glow of lotus-shaped lanterns reflected in the water, the way the snow, still clinging to the garden edges, glows blue in the torchlight. It's a scene from a painting too lovely to belong to real life. And yet here you are, within it, a quiet witness to the illusion. You pause beneath the main archway of the Jade Pavilion, where a massive lantern in the shape of your chosen fish gently sways in the evening air, its long tail curling as though it's swimming through the sky. A few people gather around to admire it. You hear your name mentioned once, in a voice too soft to identify. There's no malice in it, only curiosity. You do not turn. You simply stand there, letting the light fall across your face. Somewhere deep in your sleeves, Your fingers brush the edge of one of your folded fish sketches. You've brought them all, 23 tiny paper fish tucked discreetly into your inner pocket, their folded spines delicate and hopeful. You don't yet know why. Perhaps as a charm, perhaps as a secret act of defiance. The Emperor arrives later than expected, as always, flanked by an entourage of guards and ministers, his expression unreadable beneath the flickering lights. His robes tonight are deep violet with gold embroidery, heavy with power, and he walks like a man who's forgotten the concept of waiting. You bow, of course, and remain bowed until protocol allows your head to rise. When it does, you find his eyes on you. Not long, not burning, but there, steady for a moment before drifting away. It's enough. Not a summons, but a recognition. Something acknowledged and filed. A thread. The Empress walks a few paces behind him, flawless and gliding like an ice sculpture in motion. She smiles graciously, as she always does, her eyes scanning the room with the gentle lethality of someone born to rule by nuance. You bow again. You've learned how to survive this dance. And tonight, for the first time in many seasons, you don't feel like you're merely surviving. You're participating. When the formal procession ends and the imperial family withdraws to their elevated pavilion, the entertainment begins. Lion dancers, shadow puppets, masked singers who weave stories about gods, betrayal, and rebirth. It's beautiful, it's exhausting, and it's all designed to be remembered. But the best part of the evening comes when the attendants begin handing out lanterns to the consorts, small and delicate, painted with birds, flowers, and wishes for good fortune. This is your chance, your moment of quiet rebellion. You excuse yourself from the group, just for a moment, and slip behind the curve of the garden wall, where the crowd thins and the air feels more private. You remove one of your paper fish. It's pale green, with faded brush lines trailing along its tail. You hold it in your hands for a long while, watching the way the paper curls slightly from being folded so tightly. And then you light the base with a small flame from your sleeve lamp, letting the fish catch and flicker. The flame dances upward, slow and hesitant, then suddenly lifts. The paper glows for an instant, a pulse of life, and then it rises. The little fish lantern floats up into the sky, swallowed almost immediately by the other lights. You don't expect anyone to notice. But as you watch, another flame flickers nearby. A second lantern, not part of the official designs, begins to rise. And then a third. You blink. Look around. Someone else, maybe more than one someone, has seen you, has chosen to join. A woman you don't recognize, wrapped in lavender silk, meets your gaze briefly before looking away, expression unreadable. It doesn't matter. You feel something shift, not in the palace, not in the hierarchy, but in yourself. A thread of connection, a whisper of resistance. You release another fish, then another. By the end of the hour, 7 of your folded fish have joined the lanterns above, dancing among the stars like silent rebels, anonymous and soft and stubborn. Back in the main courtyard, the evening draws to a close. The Emperor gives his final blessing. The music fades. The servants begin clearing the trays of sweets and snuffing the torches. But you linger just a little longer, your head tilted toward the sky, watching the way the lanterns drift and glow. One of them, maybe yours, catches on a breeze and swoops downward, skimming the roof tiles before rising again. You smile, not widely, just enough. When you return to your chamber, your maid is already waiting with your nightrobe. She helps you undress, brushes your hair, pours your evening tea. But before she extinguishes the lantern, she pauses. "They were lovely," she says. Just that. No explanation. No need for one. And for the first time in months, you allow yourself to feel the full warmth of being seen. Not by the Emperor, not by the Empress, not by the court, but by someone without power, without agenda, without performance. Seen as yourself. You drift to sleep that night with the scent of burned paper in your nose and the soft weight of possibility settling gently over your chest like a second quilt. You dream of swimming, not of flying, not of running, but of gliding beneath the surface, free, quiet, untouchable. The water is warm, the stars are close, and somewhere above, your little paper fish dances in the sky. Snow melts in slow sips from the palace eaves, dripping rhythmically into the jade basins below, like time itself has grown tired of pretending to be swift, and the forbidden city begins to stretch awake from its long, crystalline slumber. You hear it in the sounds, small, almost imperceptible, the creak of distant hinges, the sweep of broom bristles against damp stone, the cautious hum of a servant as she stokes a fire. Spring is not here yet, not fully, but its breath stirs the curtains, and the frozen stillness that once held the palace in its grip now begins to fracture, revealing new rhythms beneath. You rise earlier each day now, drawn not by duty but by curiosity, by some quiet calling to witness the first signs of life daring to return. One morning, you step into the courtyard and see it. A single plum blossom curled against the branch of a gnarled tree, delicate as silk thread, its pink hue almost defiant against the gray sky. It's nothing, and it's everything. You stare at it longer than you should, feeling something unfamiliar stir in your chest. Not joy, no. Joy is too grand, too rare. But maybe anticipation, something like it. You carry that feeling with you as you move through the palace, navigating its familiar traps with the same careful grace you've cultivated for years. But lately, your steps feel different, lighter, less like you're hiding and more like you're searching. Perhaps it's the afterglow of the Lantern Festival, still whispering through the corridors like a forgotten song. Perhaps it's because no one punished you for your fish. Perhaps it's because somewhere in the folds of protocol, you found a sliver of something that felt like freedom. And now you want more. Not louder, just more. You're not the only one changing. The other consorts are shifting too, blooming and retreating like flowers unsure whether frost still lingers. Lady Yin's laughter returns, quieter now, edged with something reflective. Lady Hong has started painting again. Small birds, not poems, and once she even asked your opinion. You offered it cautiously, expecting a sharp retort. Instead, she nodded and handed you a brush. Show me. You did. The moment passed, but stayed with you. Even the Empress seems different, not softer, never that, but perhaps less precise. During a tea ceremony, she poured her own cup with a hand that trembled ever so slightly. No one mentioned it, of course. Not even a glance. But you saw. You see everything now, because you're no longer surviving blindly. You are observing, cataloging, thinking. And with that awareness comes danger. Not immediate, but always possible. Because change in this place is noticed. And noticed things are always at risk. So you remain careful. You fold your new thoughts into your sleeves like secrets. You speak when spoken to. You smile when appropriate. But behind your eyes, a new palace begins to build. One made not of walls and hierarchy, but of possibility. You begin writing again. Nothing bold, nothing public, just small vignettes written in the margins of your scrolls. Imagine scenes of women walking through snow barefoot or swimming through koi ponds lit by lanterns. You don't sign them. You don't show them. But each time you write, it's like taking a breath you didn't realize you've been holding. The words feel like proof of your own existence. One evening, while walking near the pavilion where the music lessons are held, you hear a song you've never heard before. It's hesitant, the notes uncertain, like someone learning by ear rather than reading from a score. You pause in the corridor, just out of sight, and listen. The melody is simple, but there's something about it that makes your throat ache, a kind of wistfulness you recognize but can't explain. The music stops abruptly, and for a moment you think of stepping forward, offering praise or asking its name. But you don't. Instead, you walk away, letting the tune lodge itself in your mind like a secret. Later, in your room, you hum it softly while writing. You don't even realize you're doing it until you're made, refilling the teapot, pauses and says, "That's pretty." You smile. You don't answer. The next morning, a jasmine bloom opens in the imperial garden. Just one. The head gardener places it carefully in a porcelain dish and presents it to the Empress, who nods once and has it placed on her private altar. No one mentions what it means, but everyone knows. Spring is coming, and with it, a new season of decisions, favors, shifts in power. The court begins to stir again. Summons grow more frequent, scrolls are passed, silks are commissioned. There's a pulse again in the belly of the palace, a slow drumbeat calling the game back to life. You feel the air shift around you, the way birds feel wind changing before a storm. You prepare accordingly. You rest more. You sharpen your calligraphy. You burn a new incense before sleep. Mugwort and cedar for clarity and protection. One evening, a eunuch delivers a message, a private audience with the emperor. You're not surprised. You've been expecting something. Not this exactly, but something. You nod, thank him, and begin the ritual. Your hands no longer shake. The robe is chosen, your hair arranged, your scent measured with care. But there's something else in your eyes now when you look in the mirror. Not hope, not dread, but control. You no longer enter these rooms as a girl waiting to be chosen. You enter them as someone who has chosen herself. The conversation with the emperor is easy, fluid. He comments on the lanternfish. You smile and offer a gracious word about the artisans. He asks about your writing. You deflect with a soft laugh. Just reflections, you say, on the seasons. He seems pleased. He doesn't ask more. That's fine. You don't need him to. The moment ends. The night passes, but something settles. A balance. A quiet acknowledgement. Days later, your name appears more frequently. Not at the top of the list, but near enough. The other women notice. Some glance you away more often. Others avoid your eyes. You offer them nothing. You have learned that silence is a language more powerful than flattery. And so, in this palace that demands performance, you begin to live between the scenes. Not invisible, not exposed, just present, just enough. The snow disappears entirely within the week. The basins overflow with meltwater. The blossoms begin to burst open across the garden wall. And one morning, early and quiet, you walk the long gallery again. You stop beneath the panel with the painted crane you've always admired. It's peeling slightly now. Time leaves no surface untouched. You reach into your sleeve and unfold one last paper fish. The last of the 23. You place it gently beneath the painting, hidden between two stones in the base of the wall. Not a message, not a memorial, just a mark, a whisper of presence. You step back. The wind brushes your face, warmer now. The sky is pale blue. You are not the same woman who began this journey, folded in fear and silence. You are still within the walls, but you found a way to breathe. Spring arrives not in a rush, but in a slow, ceremonial procession, as though even the seasons must bow at the gates of the forbidden city and await permission to enter. And when it finally does, it tiptoes in on the backs of swallows and the scent of damp earth. You wake one morning to the faint chirping of birds nesting in the rafters, and outside your window, the gardens are no longer hushed in white silence, but buzzing, softly, gently, with life. Buds burst from the branches like secrets whispered too long. The courtyards brighten subtly, as if someone tilted the sky, just so to let the light fall differently. And with this shift, the palace changes again. Gone are the heavy layers, the quiet fires, the forced stillness. In their place come new silks and lighter colors, apricot, pale green, soft rose, and with them, new eyes, watching. Always watching, because spring in the Forbidden City is not just a season, it is a stage. And all the players know their cues. You feel it immediately. The gentle tension in the air, like everyone's waiting for the first falter, the first mistake, the first brilliant, reckless act that will tip the balance and send someone tumbling from grace. You tighten your rope, not in fear, but in readiness. Because you have learned by now, this place doesn't just test you in winter's stillness. It tests you more in spring's bloom. It coaxes you to open, to bloom too fast, to be too noticed, to reveal too much of yourself. And you, seasoned now, no longer let beauty lull you. You walk with purpose. You speak with precision. You smile, still when required. But it is the kind of smile that conceals more than it reveals. And yet, beneath it all, you feel something tender stirring, something restless and persistent. A longing that isn't for power or favor or even freedom exactly, but for authenticity. To live, even within these gilded constraints, as someone wholly yourself. You don't say this out loud. You barely let yourself think it, but it colors your days. You begin to notice the details others overlook. A maid humming a lullaby as she sweeps. A blossom caught in the folds of the Empress's sleeve. A young scribe blushing when he hands over a scroll. These things matter. These moments, however small, feel more real than ceremony. One afternoon, you find yourself summoned. Not to the emperor, but to the Empress herself. A private tea. No pretense of formality. Just the two of you in the spring reflection hall, where the windows are thrown wide and the breeze carries in the scent of wisteria and sweet flag. She pours the tea herself. You bow. She weighs it off. Enough of that, she says, not unkindly. And so you sit. The silence stretches. You sip. She studies you, not with suspicion, but with something closer to recognition. Finally, she speaks. I've watched you. A statement, not a threat. You nod, acknowledging it. You don't chase, she says. You don't beg. You don't shrink. You simply remain. Again, you nod. Because what else can you say? You've spent seasons mastering the art of endurance. She places her teacup down with care. That will serve you, she says. Until it won't. And with that, the conversation ends. No clear message. No command. But it lingers with you, that sentence. Echoes as you walk the shaded paths back to your chamber. Until it won't. You turn it over in your mind like a smooth stone, uncertain whether it was meant as a warning or an invitation. Perhaps both. That evening, as dusk pools like watercolor over the rooftops, you return to the garden. Not to hide, not to wander, but to remember. The fish lanterns are gone, of course. Discarded. But in your mind, you still see them. You can still feel the weight of the folded paper in your palm. The way the flame took hold like it had been waiting. You sit by the koi pond, the surface glassy and gold-flecked with petals. A dragonfly schemes past, and you watch it go, its wings humming like a whispered secret. The palace is quiet again, but not with the silence of winter. This is the hush of suspense, of prelude. A pause before something begins. You don't know what's coming, but for once you don't dread it. You no longer live only in caution. You live now also in awareness, in softness, in the quiet certainty that you are here, not merely surviving, but choosing. The next day, you are assigned to oversee the festival of Double Third, a day of cleansing, of poetry, of wine sipped from river-drifted cups. It's a modest role, ceremonial, but visible. You accept it with calm. And as you plan the decorations, select the poems, arrange the seating, you do something bold. Quietly, discreetly, you slip one of your own verses into the final list. A simple one, about a fish that longs not to escape the water, but simply to swim its own way. You sign it only with a character for listen. On the day of the festival, no one comments on the poem, but one of the senior scribes pauses as he reads it aloud. He clears his throat, smiles faintly, and moves on. You watch from the edge, calm, unapologetic, a single ripple in an otherwise still pond. And that night, when you return to your room, you find a folded piece of paper beneath your teacup. It's blank, except for a brush-drawn fish. No signature, but you know, someone heard you. Someone replied. You press the paper to your chest, just for a moment, and let your breath move in and out like the tide. The palace, in all its cold splendor, still stands. The rules remain. The dangers persist, but in this moment, you feel something else, possibility. Not escape, not revolution, just the quiet, persistent blooming of a self that refuses to be erased. And that is enough, more than enough. You smile, you sleep, and in your dreams, the paper fish do not burn. They swim. Now, as the final lantern dims and the hush of night settles gently across the palace walls, your breath begins to slow. The marble floors no longer echo with footsteps. The corridors, once filled with whispers and careful glances, are silent. Even the blossoms have folded in for sleep, their petals cupped like hands in prayer beneath the weight of dew. Outside your window, the garden is still. A soft breeze stirs the curtain. Somewhere, distant and faint, a night bird sings a single note, then goes quiet again. You lie back beneath your quilt, the memory of silk and snow and flickering light still tracing softly through your thoughts. There is no need now to be watchful, no need to anticipate or calculate or carry silence like armor. In this moment, you are safe. You are enough. You have made it through the season, not untouched, but intact, and more than that, quietly transformed. Like a plum tree blooming for no one's applause. Like a folded fish rising into the night sky. Let yourself exhale slowly. Let your shoulders sink. Let the quiet settle into the spaces between your ribs. You are no longer in a palace. You are floating on a quiet river, drifting slowly past lanterns and reeds, the air warm and soft on your skin. The stars shimmer above, not watching you, just existing calmly and without expectation. The water beneath you is smooth. The current is gentle. The world is far away. There is nothing left to do, no one left to impress, just the rhythm of your breath, the softness of the night, and the certainty that you, too, are allowed to rest.